Handling domestic violence by a husband. Hi friends, welcome to Marriage Realities, a comprehensive relationship channel. Today's video is all about how domestic violence by a husband makes the life of a wife highly tormenting and agonizing. Yes, domestic violence makes your married life frightening and horrifying to you, as you have to constantly battle the never-ending verbal and physical abuse your husband metes out to you. A marriage can succeed only when there is certain basic nicety embedded into it. When your husband is abusive, all the niceties of your relationship bids goodbye. Your husband abuses you in all possible ways, making you feel misused and manipulated by him. Your husband behaves as though you are a puppet whom he can handle the way his abusive mind dictates. Your abusive husband does not understand that marriage in no way gives him the leverage to treat you at his will. You should be given respect by your husband for you to enjoy your marriage. When your husband acts abusive and disrespectful, there's no nicety worth the name in your relationship. When there is no nicety in your relationship, many a time you are a victim of domestic violence inflicted on you by your husband. Domestic violence is sheer crime. I winced when I heard loud and harsh voices coming from my neighbor's house. As usual, my neighbor was using vulgar profanities on his wife. From the noises coming out of my neighbor's house, I could assume that he was also physically ill-treating his wife. It was pathetic to hear the young girl crying her heart out. After some time, my neighbor went out as if nothing happened. After he had gone, his wife came out to close the gate her husband had left open. Her eyes were swollen and there were red marks in her cheeks. She usually stood back to talk to me whenever we met. But today she averted looking at me and quickly walked into her home. I too walked away, not wanting to add insult to her agony. The young girl was experiencing pure domestic violence. My neighbor abused his wife as though he had all the right to do it. My neighbor's wife is not a sole case experiencing such domestic violence. Though modern women have acquired great financial independence, they still continue to experience domestic abuse from the husbands. It is a harsh truth that domestic violence does exist in many marriages. Why does a husband resort to such domestic violence against his wife? There are many reasons behind it. Inferiority complex, immaturity, abusive childhood, lack of morality, addictions to alcohol and drugs all play a major role in making your husband unmannerly, bad-tempered and highly temperamental. When your husband suffers from any of the above complexities, he might indulge in domestic violence. When your husband metes out domestic violence to you, he loses his self-control and begins to physically and verbally torture you. Whatever might be the reason your husband abuses you, you should not be meek and submissive to tolerate it. Your husband has absolutely no rights to abuse you. You should not accept domestic violence docilely and let your husband derive sadistic pleasure by torturing you. How exactly does your husband exhibit domestic violence? Your husband verbally abuses you. Many a time your husband attacks you with the sole intention of hurting you. Your husband makes you emotionally drained by behaving immaturely and irresponsibly. Your husband is constantly suspicious about your loyalty and asks you many probing and insulting questions. Your abusive husband also takes total control of your life. Your husband decides what you must wear and how you must dress. Your debit cards, your credit cards are all with your husband and you have to account for every penny you spend. While you're unable to use your hard-earned money, your husband casually dips into it and enjoys himself. Your husband throws things around to bring you into submission. My husband made me walk to our home after we had an argument, my friend indignantly told me. What happened, Vani? I asked my friend. We were returning home after eating out in a restaurant. Somehow an argument brewed up between us and we argued bitterly. My husband suddenly stopped the car and asked me to get out. I too got out, thinking that he will return after a few minutes. I waited for half an hour and my husband was nowhere to be seen, my friend went on. It was bitterly cold outside and it was also late in the night. If I had my mobile with me, I could have called for a cab. But my mobile was in the car. So I had no other go than walk home. I still cannot forgive my husband for what he did to me that day. Barney looked furious against her husband. And I thought she was right in feeling so. The action of my friend's husband was a blatant display of domestic violence against her. Can you call the momentary anger of your husband as domestic violence too? You cannot call the fleeting anger of your husband as domestic violence. Momentary anger is always a fleeting outburst of frustration and irritation your husband shows towards you. There is no real venom behind the anger of your husband. Your husband might be feeling stressed at some work-related issues he was facing. And so he might utter harsh words against you just to let off the heat of his bottled up stress. In such cases, your husband feels shameful about his behavior after his anger subsides. Your husband apologizes to you and both easily make up. This sort of anger is harmless and superficial. This happens in every marriage. But domestic violence by your husband is not momentary. It is deliberate. It is degrading and insulting to you. It hurts your self-respect. If you are a victim of such a traumatic abuse by your husband, I am sure you feel pained and shamed. Many a time you just want to walk out of your marriage. Your immature husband has many negative emotions stored as a volcano in his mind. So he often bursts out in a volatile display of crude behavior which makes you hate your married life. Domestic violence can also be construed as an outward display of your husband's cowardice. It shows the total lack of humanity on the part of your husband. If you observe carefully, you will see shades of the inferiority complex your husband suffers from in his violence. Your abusive husband could be a victim of a bad and terrible childhood. He could be facing persistent failures in his profession. Your husband might not know the true values of life and so is completely lacking in morality. If you're more successful than your husband, he feels jealous of your fame and achievement. Any one of these reasons is enough to spark domestic violence in your husband. Whatever might be the reason, your husband has no rights to abuse you. You should not accept the domestic violence meted out by your husband meekly and let him have sadistic pleasure in torturing you. How exactly should you deal with domestic violence meted to you by your husband? You should not take the domestic violence of your husband lightly. You should never ever be cowed down by your husband's unwarranted display of violent anger. You should move out of your house if your husband displays psychopath behavior and intentionally hurts you. Seek the help of your parents or friends when things go out of control. Keep your important documents, keys, dress in a suitcase and be ready to leave when things go out of hand. When your husband indulges in extreme physical assault, you should definitely inform the police. You have all the rights to expect your husband to respect you. When your husband constantly displays domestic violence against you, you start debating whether you should continue living in such a worthless marriage. And you will not be wrong if you want to terminate your marriage. Did this video make you understand that you're often a victim of domestic violence meted out to you by your husband? Marriage realities will have many such relationship eye-openers. Subscribe to my channel to understand your marriage in a new light. Press the bell icon for updates about my latest relationship videos. Make love forever and to death do us part your relationship goal.